Picture this. You're 70 feet underground. The air is absolute ice, just biting at your skin. And you've just made the deliberate, terrifying choice to turn off your only flashlight. Why? Because you suddenly realize you are not alone down here. What happens when we dig into things we were never, ever meant to find?
There's something living down there, and it knows we're here. Now listen, that's not some urban legend whispered around a campfire. That is the actual, documented, official statement of a transit worker named Marcus Webb, a man who spent 6 agonizing hours trapped in the forgotten pitch-black tunnels beneath Chicago, just listening as something methodically hunted him.
So in this explainer, we're going to trace exactly how this whole nightmare started. Meet Sandra Kowalski. She's a veteran investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune, and Sandra is a total skeptic. She's a hard-nosed facts woman who absolutely does not entertain ghost stories, but her entire grip on reality totally fractures on a Tuesday morning when her editor drops this thick, unmarked manila folder right onto her desk. Inside, a chilling police report about a missing transit worker.
6. That is exactly how many hours Marcus Webb vanished inside a closed, heavily restricted section of the Lower Wacker Tunnel network. When the emergency search team finally managed to breach these heavy steel doors and find him, he was sitting on the freezing concrete floor, a solid quarter-mile away from his maintenance crew. His flashlight was deliberately turned off. He was shivering uncontrollably, just staring completely blankly at a crumbling brick wall.
Well, the contents of that folder systematically tear down Sandra's deeply ingrained skepticism. I mean, inside, she finds Webb's erratic, almost completely incoherent police report talking about massive gaps of missing time. She finds these frantic screenshots of swiftly deleted Reddit threads from urban explorers claiming they saw unnatural, shifting lights down in the dead tunnels. And clipped to the very back of the file, just a single yellow sticky note pointing her to an expert Chicago historian named Dr. Patricia Haynes.
To really grasp the sheer terror of what Webb experienced, we have to talk about Bellows Junction. These cavernous tunnels were dug way back in 1923 for an elevated rail expansion that just failed. They were completely sealed with thick concrete in 1934, briefly and quietly popped open as storage bunkers during World War II, and then permanently resealed in 1946. So officially, according to the city, this massive underground labyrinth has been entirely abandoned for 80 years. But here's the thing about Dr. Haynes. She isn't prone to folklore. Over the last 22 years, she's been quietly hoarding a 4-inch thick physical file of unexplained sightings, bizarre seismic readings, and missing persons reports, all centered right around Bellows Junction. Her terrifying conclusion? She says we didn't just build tunnels. We actually dug into something ancient that we didn't understand, we sealed it in, we forgot about it, and it's still down there. Desperate to prove this is all just structural settling or, copper thieves, Sandra pulls literally every favor she has to get a stripped 2-hour daylight access pass. At exactly 10:17 a.m., accompanied by a very jittery CTA structural engineer named Darius Fletcher, she crosses the threshold of this heavy, rusted steel door hidden deep in a municipal parking garage and steps directly into the dark. The visceral reality of the descent hits them instantly. The temperature just tanks, a 20-degree drop right away. And the smell is suffocating. It's this mix of deep, wet stone, stagnant water, and something impossibly ancient and mineral that just coats the back of your throat. Their heavy-duty flashlights cut through the freezing air to show decaying, century-old brickwork. Dead electrical conduits cling to the ceiling like blackened veins, right next to heavy rusted steel brackets left over from World War II. It's like walking into an airtight, suffocating time capsule.
Now, exactly 17 minutes into their walk, they hit this massive, terrifying disconnect between the official records and reality, a 3-way split in the tunnel system. The official CTA blueprints absolutely insist this system ends right here at a solid concrete wall. But looking down the right branch, Sandra's flashlight catches a heavy, old wooden door that's been violently torn completely off its hinges, leading into an entirely unmapped, sprawling abyss.
Suddenly, they just freeze. I mean, what on earth is making that sound? Echoing from the unmapped left branch is this low, sustained tone. It is not a human voice, and it is definitely not mechanical. It's a slow, rhythmic, pulsing hum that suggests a deliberate breathing pattern. The sound literally vibrates right through the soles of their boots, paralyzing them both as the temperature in the tunnel seems to plummet even further.
When that awful sound finally stops, the dead silence that follows is somehow even worse. Sweeping her flashlight across the floor, Sandra makes a horrific discovery. Down in the thick, undisturbed gray dust that hasn't been touched in decades, she finds a set of fresh footprints. Someone or something walked directly out of the pitch-black left branch, straight across the junction and into the right branch past that violently broken door. But the footprints, they never come back.
Realizing that whatever made those heavy tracks is currently sitting in the dark just past that hanging door waiting for them, Darius breaks every single professional protocol. He knows for a fact that no living human has been down here since Marcus Webb vanished. His voice drops into this deadpan, terrified whisper, just absolutely dripping with dread as he states one chilling fact: we're leaving.
Fast forward 3 weeks. Desperate for answers and totally unable to let the mystery go, Sandra actually tracks Marcus Webb down to his apartment in Wicker Park. And guys, he is a shell of a man. He's quit his CTA job, he's locked all his deadbolts, and he hasn't slept for more than 20 minutes at a time in 4 months. Sitting there at his dark kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee, he finally confesses exactly what he found behind that broken door.
Marcus tells her he was following this strange, heavy dragging sound echoing in the dark, and he slowly pushed open that broken wooden door. What he stepped into was a room impossibly large for the city's underground grid. The brickwork was completely different, ancient, rough-hewn stone, and hidden right in the exact center of this massive, freezing cavern, sitting completely silent on rusted tracks that absolutely shouldn't exist, was a 4-car wooden train from the early 1900s, its paint just peeling away in the damp air.
14. In the total pitch black of that cavern, Marcus slowly swept his flashlight beam across the windows of the wooden train, and he counted exactly 14 figures. They were sitting inside the decaying cars, sitting perfectly still, bolt upright, facing forward, exactly like normal commuters just waiting in the dark.
Marcus is standing there, utterly frozen, right? His heart is pounding against his ribs. He's holding his breath, just praying his flashlight beam hadn't disturbed them. But the very second he turns his back to run toward the heavy wooden door, he hears them. All 14 heads turn to look at him at the exact same moment, making this single, unified, horrific mechanical sound.
And this brings us right back to that terrifying moment we started with. Absolute panic takes over. Marcus runs blindly into the winding labyrinth of brick, he kills his flashlight so they can't track the beam, and he collapses against a wet wall. For 6 agonizing hours, he sat there in total, suffocating darkness, clutching his knees, just listening to heavy footsteps drag through the tunnels as they systematically, methodically hunted for him.
So, hearing this insane confession, Sandra takes all the evidence, and she publishes her massive expose in the Chicago Tribune. But to save her hard-earned journalistic credibility, she strips out every single paranormal element. She leaves out the unreturning footprints. She deletes the rhythmic pulsing sound. She completely omits the ghost strain. She tells herself the mundane version of the story is enough, honestly thinking she's closed the book on Bellows Junction forever. Boy, is she dead wrong.
3 days before the article even goes to print, a completely unmarked, weathered envelope arrives in the Tribune's mailroom, addressed directly to Sandra. No return address. Inside is a single, heavily creased 60-year-old black and white photograph. And it shows the exact underground wooden train Marcus described sitting at that exact hidden stone platform, deep beneath the city. But it's what's written on the back of this decades-old photograph, in this faded, impossible ink, that completely shatters Sandra's reality and proves Marcus wasn't crazy. 7 terrifying words. They have been waiting since 1934.
Think about that. If they've been waiting down there in the dark since 1934, what exactly are they waiting for? And more terrifyingly, what happens when they finally decide to stop waiting? If you want to survive our next descent into the dark, you need to like and subscribe to this explainer right now.
What happens when a government seals a secret in the dark for so long that it actually stops being what it was?
Imagine walking down the wide, sunlit avenues of Washington, D.C., completely unaware that exactly 90 feet beneath your feet, directly below the Federal Triangle, lies a classified, unimaginable horror. It's a place that has been entirely, deliberately scrubbed from the public record. Section 1. The Subterranean Secret, a footnote in the archives. Our guide into this nightmare is Dr. Raymond Okafor. Now, Okafor wasn't some fringe conspiracy theorist. He was a meticulous, highly decorated Georgetown University historian who had already spent 16 years studying the hidden architecture of American political power. And his descent into the dark? Well, it all started with a single, dry footnote buried at the absolute bottom of page 34 in a declassified 1953 document from the Office of Civil Defense.
The detail he found was frankly staggering. It referenced Emergency Rail Asset P9, or Platform 9. It was listed as a fully operational underground train system designated for executive branch priority evacuation. Here is why that's so chilling. Washington, D.C.'s metro system wasn't built until 1976. That means Platform 9 was a massive, hidden facility running beneath the city decades before the modern metro was even conceived.
So Okafor starts digging, and he spends 4 months tracing fragments of this phantom station across multiple archives. The timeline he uncovers is wild. Platform 9 was constructed between 1942 and 1944. It was successfully used to move senior officials during the terrifying 13 days of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. But then, in 1963, the records don't just slowly fade out. They vanish entirely, just a complete unnatural blackout.
Section 2. The Colonel's Warning. A voice from 1963. At this point, Dr. Okafor really couldn't tell if the facility was decommissioned or simply sealed off from civilian eyes. But then he gets his hands on the restricted personal papers of a retired Army Corps of Engineers officer named Colonel Walter Briggs, and inside, he finds a single, undated handwritten note.
Listen to what this note actually says. P9 is not empty. Whatever decision was made in '63, it was the wrong one. The facility should have been destroyed, not sealed. I have said this to 3 directors and been ignored 3 times. I will not say it again. But whoever reads this after I am gone, do not open those tunnels. Whatever is in there now, it is not what we put there. Now, against every fiber of warning in that letter, Okafor applied for and miraculously received authorized access to go down and see it for himself.
Section 3. Descent to Platform 9, 90 feet down. After 6 grueling weeks of federal background checks, Okafor is assigned an escort. Department of Homeland Security agent Carol Simmons. She's a composed woman who answers questions with absolute minimal effort. On a random Tuesday morning, she leads him deep into the belly of a Federal Triangle building, beginning a methodical, heavily secured physical journey down into a totally forgotten era.
They were moving entirely off the map here. They walk through locked sub-basement corridors until they hit an unmarked steel door in a bare concrete wall. Agent Simmons uses a keypad, does a biometric scan, and the heavy door hisses open. It releases this pressurized seal, revealing a steeply descending 1940s vintage iron staircase. Every single footstep just rings out on the metal as they step 90 feet out of the modern world.
When they hit the bottom, the smell hits Okafor first. It's the scent of trapped time. Just old, stone-cold air that hadn't circulated in decades, mixed with the harsh smell of concrete and metal. And there it was, Platform 9. It was massive. 200 feet long, completely covered in institutional green ceramic tiles from the 1940s. There were these faint amber lights, still inexplicably drawing power from somewhere, casting really long, eerie shadows over the perfectly clean platform edge. But you guys, it was what sat on the tracks below that commanded the space. 3 train cars, government gray, totally unmarked, and sitting in terrifyingly perfect preservation. I mean, the metal showed absolutely zero rust. The dark glass of the windows was entirely intact. It had been 80 years in the dark, and it looked like it was ready to depart at any second. Meanwhile, Agent Simmons just hangs back near the stairs, watching the train with this strange, guarded tension.
Section 4. The third car, the silhouette. Okafor spends about 40 minutes meticulously documenting the platform and the first 2 cars. The interiors were perfectly empty, just rows of standard institutional gray seats. But then, he moves to the third car.
The second Okafor approaches this third car, he realizes something is horribly wrong. The window was visibly darker than the others. It was opaque, coated in this strange, thick film on the inside that completely swallowed the beam of his flashlight. It diffused the light instead of letting it pierce through the glass.
He presses himself right up against the platform edge, squinting into the gloom of the very last row of seats. And then, his heart just slams against his ribs. Through the darkened glass, barely distinguishable from the shadows, is a silhouette, a figure, seated perfectly upright, hands resting motionless in its lap, facing straight forward. Okafor tries to keep his voice steady and calls Agent Simmons over, telling her there is someone in the train. She immediately snaps back, "That's not possible." But she walks over. She shines her own flashlight against the thick glass. Okafor watches her face, and what he sees is in shock. It's this horrifying look of reluctant confirmation. It's the look of someone realizing a nightmare they really hoped wasn't true is absolutely real.
"We need to end the visit," she commands abruptly. Okafor pushes back, obviously demanding to know who is sitting in that car. Agent Simmons looks at the train, then looks at him, and drops her voice to deliver a line that Okafor would later write down verbatim just to prove to himself he hadn't lost his mind. She whispers, "It's not always there."
She orders him straight back to the staircase. But as Okafor turns to leave, he casts one final glance over his shoulder at the third car. The figure is still seated in the dark, but now its head had rotated, just slightly. It had turned away from the front of the train and was now staring directly through the opaque glass, right at him.
Section 5. The 1963 Incident. Unsealed Secrets. Okafor flees back to the surface. For 3 desperate weeks, he hunts for answers, calling literally every federal contact he has. The trail eventually leads him to Frank DeLuca, an ex-Defense Intelligence Agency operative. When Okafor describes what he saw down there, DeLuca goes completely silent. He explains that in the intelligence community, Platform 9 is the ultimate cautionary tale of a disastrous 1963 decommissioning failure. An incident so terrifying it made hardened spies shift uncomfortably in their seats.
DeLuca looks Okafor dead in the eye and completely validates Colonel Briggs' old warning. DeLuca says, "Some things, when you seal them in the dark for long enough, stop being what they were. And whatever is in that third car now, it is not what was put there in 1963.
Section 6. The Photographic Anomaly, Proof of Nothing. Shaken to his absolute core, Okafor retreats to his Georgetown office late at night. He sits there alone in the dark, opening his laptop to methodically review the digital photographs he had taken down on the platform. He clicks through the empty first car, the empty second car, and then he reaches the third car.
He had taken 6 photographs of that third car from 6 different angles. But as he stares at his screen, this cold dread just washes over him. In every single photograph, the window was just dark glass. You could see no interior, no seats, and absolutely no figure.
Think about that for a second. The camera saw absolutely nothing. Okafor had seen it. Agent Simmons had seen it. They had both stood right there and watched the silhouette turn its head to look at them. But whatever entity was sitting in the dark of that train either did not possess a physical body, or it was something that simply could not be captured by light.
Okafor published a book on Cold War infrastructure a year later, but he deliberately left out every single mention of Platform 9. The bureaucratic blackout was absolute. All of his Freedom of Information Act requests were flat out denied under national security exemptions. Agent Simmons was quietly transferred to an undisclosed location, and the 1963 incident remains completely unacknowledged by the United States government.
Platform 9 is still down there today, 90 feet beneath the feet of politicians, commuters, and tourists. Which leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling question. If the camera saw absolutely nothing, what was it that looked back at Dr. Okafor from the darkness of that third car? If you enjoyed this explainer and survived a descent, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's darkest secrets.
What breathes in the dark beneath the streets of New York when millions of people are walking right above, just completely oblivious to the absolute silence beneath their feet? What happens when that silence is broken by a sound that simply shouldn't exist? Welcome to tonight's explainer, where we're exploring the beautifully terrifying, shadowy setting of the MTA's abandoned City Hall station. Hidden deep under the chaotic streets of Lower Manhattan, this architectural marvel is a place most New Yorkers literally don't even know exists. It's an entire world swallowed by darkness, with millions of tons of concrete and steel pressing down, sealing it completely away from the living city. 1945. That is the year the heavy iron doors finally closed for good. Since December 31st of that year, this station has been completely sealed off from the public. I mean, really think about the sheer weight of that time. For nearly 80 years, while skyscrapers were going up and coming down on the surface, while entire generations lived and died, this space just sat there in deep, undisturbed isolation. The dust on the platform, completely devoid of footprints. The rusted tracks lead into absolute blackness. It's kind of locked in a permanent, heavy midnight. Okay, let's dive into this, because the space is this profound, almost tragic contrast. It's an absolute masterpiece of 1904 architecture, with these sweeping Romanesque arches, intricate skylights with colored glass tiles, and elegant brass chandeliers that haven't seen electricity in decades. Yet among urban explorers and veteran transit workers, it has this notorious dark reputation. Because despite the buried beauty of the glass and brass, anyone who steps foot down there agrees on one undeniable truth. It is deeply, profoundly unsettling. Which brings us to Section 1, Descent into the Dark. We're following the documented account of James Calloway. He was a 34-year-old MTA historian given a late-night assignment to assess the structural condition of the abandoned station. Now, he wasn't going in completely blind. A veteran transit supervisor, Greg Harmon, guided him from the brightly lit modern tracks to the heavy steel door of the access point. But right before James descended the maintenance stairs into the pitch black, Greg stopped him. Greg's face went completely deadpan. The exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by this deadly seriousness. He looked at James and gave a very specific, flat warning: don't go north. Stepping onto the abandoned platform, James was instantly swallowed by 80 years of accumulated shadow. The sensory shift was immediate and honestly, violently disorienting. You know that familiar hum of the city above? The distant rumble of subway traffic? The vibration of life? It all faded away into a suffocating quiet. He was completely alone, and the darkness down there was physical. It felt thick, almost like fog. His heavy-duty flashlight beam literally seemed to struggle, barely cutting through the oppressive, ancient air of this underground cathedral. Section 2, Something in the Air. Now, what's really interesting about this is the first sign of wrongness, because it wasn't a sound or shape in the dark. It was a creeping, unnatural coldness that seeped straight through his heavy jacket. And then, the smell hit him at exactly 1:15 a.m. It wasn't the metallic bite of old rails or that damp, familiar scent of concrete mold. No, it was a sweet smell, sickly sweet, like flowers left way too long in standing water. It was the deeply disturbing stench of organic decay, horribly, impossibly out of place, in a sealed tunnel made strictly of stone, steel, and dust. The terror unfolded with clinical precision. At 1:15 a.m., that unexplainable, rotten, sweet smell flooded the platform. By 1:34 a.m., James's brand new, fully charged flashlight inexplicably flickered, dying completely for 3 agonizing seconds before snapping back on. And at 1:36 a.m., the photograph was taken. An unbearable, suffocating tension was building in the dark, pressing in on him from all sides. Because from the total darkness of the Forbidden North corridor, a sound began. Slow, rhythmic, wet, shh, like something heavy and soft being dragged very slowly across the old, gritty stone floor. Oh, there's so many yummy vegetarian options out there. You could try like lentil soup, veggie burgers, tofu stir-fry. The possibilities are endless. Shh. The horrible, wet, dragging sound repeated every 4 or 5 seconds, getting slightly louder, increasing the tension until the air felt thick enough to choke on. James froze completely. His heart hammered this frantic, deafening rhythm against his ribs. He held his breath, terrified that even the sound of his own lungs expanding would draw it closer. He desperately told his panicking mind, it's just old pipes, just underground water, just the massive station settling under the weight of the city. Section 3, The Figure in the Archway. And this brilliantly illustrates the sudden shift. Out in the deep shadows of the north end, the rhythmic dragging suddenly stopped. The heavy, oppressive, suffocating silence of the abandoned station returned for just a fraction of a second before it was violently shattered. A single, sharp crack of splitting wood echoed off the glazed tiles. It sounded exactly like someone with immense, heavy weight stepping directly onto a rotted board. That sudden jarring noise broke James's paralysis, and it forced him to whip his flashlight toward the distant archway. Standing absolutely motionless in the edge of the flashlight's beam, framed right in the arched doorway, was a figure. A horrifying realization washed over James as his eyes adjusted. Its proportions were entirely wrong, unnatural. It was far too tall to be human. It was incredibly, impossibly thin. Its arms hung down at its sides, sure, but they extended entirely too far, ending way below its knees. And its head was tilted at a sharp, painful, unnatural angle. Just listening to him breathe. James backed up until his shoulder blades hit the cold tile wall. He clicked his radio, fingers trembling violently. Barely containing a rising, suffocating panic, he pressed the mic to his mouth and whispered to Greg Harmon up on the surface. "There's someone down here with me, on the platform, north end." Think about that. He was 100 feet underground, locked inside a sealed, forgotten tomb, trapped with an impossible intruder. The radio crackled with static, and Greg's response was chilling. Look, Greg was a 30-year veteran of the Transit Authority. He had seen every imaginable horror the city's underbelly had to offer, but the tired flatness of his voice, completely gone, replaced by a sudden, stark, visceral terror. This was not a drill. The veteran was absolutely terrified for him. Greg told James, "Don't approach. Start walking back toward me, now." Keeping his shaking flashlight pinned on the archway, James took one agonizingly slow step backward toward the stairs. And as his foot touched the ground, the figure vanished. But it didn't walk away. It didn't step back into the deeper shadows of the tunnel. It simply ceased to be visible. Literally, between one blink and the next, it disappeared, exactly like a light bulb being switched off in the pitch black. When James finally scrabbled up the concrete stairs, his lungs burning, Greg was waiting by the heavy steel door. Greg didn't ask if he was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He just stared at James's pale face and asked exactly what it looked like. After James described the impossible, elongated limbs and the tilted head, Greg gave him his grim, robotic instructions. Step 1, write the report. Step 2, recommend renovation. Step 3, never come back alone. Because then Greg revealed a reality-shattering truth. James wasn't the first. This was the third time that year an inspector had reported the exact same entity in the North Corridor. Which takes us to our final section, Section 4, what the camera caught. So the crucial point is, James now lies awake in his apartment in Queens. He's physically safe, hundreds of feet above the dark, but he's endlessly haunted by the terrifying detail he deliberately left out of his official MTA report. See, while James was working on the platform, paralyzed by fear, his equipment was blindly recording the darkness. His professional structural camera was mounted on a tripod, set to auto capture. That's a setting designed to fire the flash and take a high-resolution photograph automatically at a fixed interval every 90 seconds. It took him weeks to finally look at the digital files. Sitting alone in his living room, his hands were physically shaking as he dragged his mouse across the screen, clicking through the timeline. Image after image of the empty, dusty platform. And then, in the photograph taken at exactly 1:36 a.m., 2 minutes after he first heard that wet, dragging sound, the flash had fired, illuminating the absolute darkness of the north end. And the impossibly tall figure in the archway is clearly, undeniably visible right there in the background of the image. But actually, that is not why James Calloway can no longer sleep with the lights off. He can't sleep because when he zoomed in on the high-resolution image, zooming past the impossibly long arms, zooming past the tilted head, he looked closer at the deeper shadows clustered inside the archway behind it. It wasn't alone. So, I have to ask you, what breathes in the dark? And do you dare ride the rails alone tonight? Thank you for walking through the shadows with me. If you survive this descent, be sure to like and subscribe for more terrifying explainers, because you really never know what we'll find lurking just beneath the surface.